Welcome to Work From Your Happy Place, the podcast that equips you with the tools, know-how, and motivation to live your dreams and find your happy place. Be sure to sign up for our free weekly newsletter for a recap of the week's guests and a preview of what's in store. To sign up, simply text the word Happy Place with no space to 33444. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce the host of Work From Your Happy Place, Belinda Ellsworth.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Work From Your Happy Place, our artist edition. I am very excited to share my guest with you today, Tim Tortora. Tim has spent his impressive career in the entertainment industry, garnering extensive production, accounting, and producing experience before launching his new company, Full Force Financial. For several decades, Tim served as a film and television executive at a series of studios, including significant tenures at Oprah Winfrey's Harpo Films, Mandalay, and the Walt Disney Company. This management experience has enabled Tim to have a real-world understanding of the day-to-day needs of film and TV production in the entertainment industry. It is my pleasure to welcome Tim to our show today.
Hello there. Thanks for having me.
Hi. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Great. Now you are calling in from sunny California. Is that correct?
I am indeed. I call Los Angeles my home and have my entire life, although I've spent a lot of time on the road making movies and TV.
Oh, wonderful. So, Tim, let's just fill in some of the gap of this bio. Let's hear a little bit about your journey, and then let's hear more about what you're doing today.
My journey, it started as a freshman in college. I was a music major. I was a drummer in elementary and high school, and I thought I wanted to be a musician. And then I went to school and I realized I wasn't really that interested in practicing all the time by myself without, making music. So, and we were all required to take recording class, and because of that, I got interested in it, and I took a job doing that as an intern, which led to paid work, which led to working at a studio, I should say a studio, meaning Columbia Pictures, TriStar Pictures, in marketing for an ad agency. And then I got further and further away from making movies and music and just thought, I want to go back to it. And I started working as a PA on Dream On in 1992 for HBO, and that kind of it just blew up from there. I went to go work. I ran physical production for Oprah Winfrey's film and TV unit for 4 years, ran the Benji franchise for 10. And now I work as a full-time CFO for producers who make television movies and episodic TV.
Oh, that's exciting.
It is. Yeah, it's fun work. It's been a fascinating career, I have to say. I've worked with some amazing people, and I've worked on some amazing material. I've also worked on some crap, to quote Michael Caine from his Oscar speech a few years ago. But, it's the nature of the work. You're not always going to work on things that you like and that you think are interesting and high quality. You work. You do whatever you need to do to make a living. And this is a freelance job or a freelance industry that is entirely based on a referral, going from one project to another.
I love that you said that, because I think some people, when they think of doing something that they're passionate about, I hear people say this all the time. Well, you got to love what you're doing, or, if it isn't any fun, then it isn't worth doing. And, that's just, it's like at the end of the day, in the overall picture at the 360 degree, you'd like to feel that way. But along the way, you're going to take on work that you learned a lot from it, but it might not have been the most fun, and might have even been a real flop. And you're going to have those along the way, and it's just part of the process.
Yeah, I mean, this is a business. You have to make a living, and you're not always going to work on things you like. You're not always going to work on things that you find fulfilling, especially as you get into your career. I mean, for the first probably 5 years in working in film production or in the film industry, you're going to probably know nobody. You're going to know nothing. You're going to have zero skills. And whether you went to film school or not, and I hear it all the time from film school graduates, how important they are and how educated they are and how brilliant they are. But the truth is, they don't know anything. And they come into an industry. They may have some creative ideas, but they come into the industry and they think they're going to work on things that they love, and it's feed your passion. And I think the education market, both in the film school, especially in film school, but just generally, I think they're doing a disservice to people, which is do something you love. And I disagree. I
Mm-hmm.
think you will figure out what you love. You will find something you love. I figured out at a young age that I'm the guy with the most obvious idea creatively in the room. So I'm not going to be making X Files. I'm not going to be making Star Wars or anything of that sort of cutting edge, right? I'm not going to be the guy who writes The Queen's Gambit because I just don't, my brain doesn't function like that. There are people who are in a fifth or sixth or seventh dimension making extraordinary creative. Those people are amazing. I'm not that guy. I learned that early on. I learned that I really loved the technical part of the business. I loved the financial part of it. And I set a course in those areas and I thrived and I became very good at budgeting, cost reporting, physical logistics, getting people, equipment, and materials in a place to make a movie or a TV show. And that's what I did for 20 plus years. And I've been doing this entirely for 35 plus years.
Wow. So what does your business look like today? So you've got your new company, and what's that look like?
Well, Full Force Financial actually it was created in 2000. So let me take a step back. What Full Force Financial is a production services specifically focusing on finance in the niche of film production. So the
Okay.
way we do film production finance in television and feature film is antiquated. It's paper based. It has been for years. And in 2013, I embarked on writing software that was built around the idea that I had to bring home 24 inches of paper every night to do my job as a CFO or as a line producer. And I wanted to get away from that because I newly had a daughter and I wanted to spend time with her. I wanted to give her a bath, put her to bed, and go back to work. So I couldn't do that if I was going to work in film production and be schlepping paper back and forth. So I started writing software. I mean, I know enough about writing code to be dangerous that I can break things. I know enough to be able to communicate with programmers and data scientists and those kinds of people, right? So that I know what's nonsense and what's real and sort of how to guide a project, right? Project management really is sort of my level of knowledge. So I started writing software. I hired some programmers overseas who built not an accounting package, but a document management system so that I could do my job from home in my slippers in the morning and from, after putting my daughter to bed. Well, that evolved into doing that and offering the service to other people and then doing this job of film production finance entirely remotely, which is not a natural predilection by the producers and the studios. Their default from the 1950s and 60s is, put man on plane, send to location, get paper, pay bills, come home, bring paper back in boxes. I mean, literally, it's that binary, and that's stupid. So,
Mm-hmm.
and some of that's driven by the unions, and technology is really not their favorite thing. And some of it's just driven by fear. The studio jobs, once you get a studio job, they're hard to get, they're well paid, and they're amazing. And most of those people either drop dead or they retire, and they retire at an old age. So nobody in the studio system is going to say, let's turn this whole thing we've been doing for 30 years upside down and start doing something different. Even with COVID, we're going right back to the way we used to do business, and that's paper-based and and to some extent, and not at the cutting edge. So I built Full Force Financial for the purpose of offering that service to other producers in town and eliminating the paper process and the payroll services that we currently use that kind of steal from us and pocket profit and take money off the screen and put it in their own pockets.
So that's interesting, especially like you said, a lot of businesses are reshaping after COVID how they're going to operate, and yet there are some that are just going to walk right back into the way they've always done things. It's interesting.
Yeah, inertia is a really hard thing to break. And when you look at, just the payroll alone in film production around the world, just looking at Hollywood. So the big studios, Netflix, Amazon, the big streamers,
Mm-hmm.
you put all of those together, the aggregate amount of money that we're processing in film production is probably in excess of $30 billion. So just the mere fact that it's at such scale and at such speed, that's what people who work in film production do really well. You are able to work at speed and at scale. When I say speed, I mean most people look at an idea, they say, okay, we want to do that. We want to execute it in the next 6 to 12 months. We want to see what it looks like in 18 months, and then we're going to scale that business out from there. In film production, in a matter of 12 weeks, and in some cases 3 or 4 weeks, depending on the budget, you're building an office, developing an infrastructure, putting paper and people and desks and offices and phones and all the rest of it to build systems so that people can get paid through payroll, following federal and state guidelines. So people can get paid, vendors can get paid, grip, electric, camera, prop, wardrobe, whatever. Got a lot of stuff you got to rent and buy. So you essentially build this infrastructure that most people and most businesses do over 6 months to a year. We do it in a month. We do it in a couple of weeks, actually. And then that system starts to hum and really starts to work in its best example when you have professionals who are trained and who are good at what they do. So when I say speed, we do what most people do in a year or 6 months. We do it in a matter of weeks. And you have to be able to take an idea, break it down, convert it into actual tangible something, and then make a decision about analyzing it and seeing whether or not you're moving in the right direction. If you're not, you have to change that. And that all happens on the fly. And most businesses don't do that. And that's a skill that we learn in entertainment that is something that not many people learn in other parts of the of industry.
Wow. So if someone is coming to you, or do they come to you with an idea because you're in this business and they come and I've got this idea for a movie, or is this, how do you advise them in that? Or is that what people actually come to you and say, this is what I really want to produce? Is it worthy of it? Or do you give your advice on that from a financial standpoint?
I do get that, and I do consult for filmmakers once in a while on whether or not the project they're working on has legs financially. In other words, is there a way to make the movie that you have created as written, and what's the cost of doing that? I don't do a lot of that anymore. I haven't done a budget for movies in probably close to 13 years. So
Okay.
I'm not the best guy to sit down and do that anymore because I'm just not in the weeds anymore. I'm a lot higher than that now as a CFO. So there are people who do that, and they're really good at it. But on the creative side, I never really did that. In fact, I used to say the reason I got along and worked for Harpo Films for so long was because I never stuck my nose in the creative. I didn't tell the creatives, oh, that's a terrible idea, you can't do that. I would just put my head down and try to figure out how to make the creative come together given the constraints of time and money that we were given. And that in itself is an extremely creative job. Trying to figure out how to steal money from wardrobe to give it to grip because you have some big shot the director wants to get, or a screenplay calls out, whatever. It is a very creative way, and it takes experience, and sort of sitting down and racking your brain, thinking, how am I going to pull this off? But I never really have gotten into the editorializing about the quality or the successful nature of a screenplay. That being said, I've been around it, and those people in the business are traditionally that department in the business is called development. And
Okay.
if you're a writer or you're a director, that's who you're selling to. And if in the industry they're buying blue shoes, you got to be making blue shoes. And if you're making red shoes, you're not going to sell anything. Or you're going to sell to a niche market, which you have to make a decision about whether or not you want to sell what the industry is currently buying. And I also say to young filmmakers, if you see it on the screen today, the people buying it were buying it at least a year and a half and probably more like 3 years ago. So you have to be educated about what the industry's buying today. And it's a copycat business. And if one producer's buying a screenplay having to do with Martha Stewart going to jail, I'm just making up an idea. Like I said, I'm the most obvious idea in the room. If you're doing something about Martha Stewart going to jail, then 3 other producers are doing the same thing. So you have to know what that thing is in order to compete. And really, you don't necessarily want to be writing, if you're a young filmmaker, about that subject. You just want to have an understanding of where the industry is at the moment so that you can write relevant content for those people who are buying it in development.
Wow, that's interesting.
Super important skill that most young filmmakers just don't understand. And they need to understand that.
I can imagine. So how has the business overall these years affected your lifestyle?
Well, I had a kid when I was 45. She's now 10. I got married when I was 39. I traveled around the world and lived overseas for almost 20 years of my life, which was amazing. And I wouldn't have given it up. I wouldn't give it up for anything. But it certainly has had a profound impact on how I've lived my life and how I chose to come to family much later in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I did that was intentional. It wasn't by mistake. I knew I always wanted to work at headquarters, whatever it was, and I chose the film business. If I was going to do cars, I would have moved to Detroit. If I was going to do Wall Street or was going to do finance, I would have moved to Wall Street. So I always knew I wanted to be in the center of whatever industry I was working at HQ, and I always wanted to travel and see other parts of the world, and I wanted to do it for extended periods of time, not just, go on a cruise and pop into St. Martin or wherever you are for 8 hours and get back on a boat and go to the next place. It just didn't feel interesting to me. And there are lots of things about that as interesting, but it just wasn't something I wanted to do, seeing the world. So I intentionally chose the track I chose and the kind of work, going on location and actually making movies around the world intentionally, and put off having a family or even getting involved in the idea of having a family until my late 30s, because I wanted to spend 15 or 20 years seeing the world. And I did exactly that.
That's awesome. And I think that's important for people to understand. You can still have it both, because now you have a family and your daughter, and now you're carving out your path of not being on the road, not going to be traveling all the time, and doing what you still love in a way that serves where you are in your life right now.
Yeah. And, if I were to say something to someone who's young and a filmmaker coming into the industry, I would say, if you choose to work in film production, it's a transient life. It's not the regular paycheck. You have to figure out how much money you're going to earn and what your expenses are, and match those two things, and understand that the average person working in production works about 38 weeks out of 52 a year. So you have to live your life based on only earning 38 weeks. If you make more, fabulous, spend it, put it away, do whatever you want with it. It's long hours. This is a young person's business. When you get to be 35 or 40, you're going to look around and go, God, the people I used to work with, I'm not working with anymore. And I'm almost 40. And what am I going to do with my life? And you're stuck making $100,000 or more in a job you're unhappy doing, because it's a young person's business and it's not built for family. So that's the one thing I would say to my 25-year-old self, which I actually intentionally did say to a friend. If I get to be 40 and I'm still working in film production in the trenches, you need to tap me on the shoulder and say, what the hell are you doing? And I literally came back from a picture in Mexico, which I wrote a book about. And I came back, almost wound up getting arrested by the Mexican government. And a friend of mine who I told this to when I was 25, well, I was at lunch with her, and she tapped me on the shoulder and said, what are you doing? And I was like, you're right. I need to figure this out. And that's how I started working as a CFO and developed Full Force Financial.
Oh, that's great. So let's talk about that just a little bit. I was going to talk about one of your greatest accomplishments, and I was going to read into one of your probably greatest challenges or obstacles. Would you consider that Mexico trip adventure one of your greatest challenges?
It certainly was one of the biggest challenges. But, at the end of the day, when I sat down and broke that situation down, it was my own damn fault. We were 6 days out from principal in North Carolina. I was the second line producer who was hired on that show. The original one was fired, and I replaced him a couple weeks out from principal. 6 days out, the producers came to me and said, hey man, we got to shut down North Carolina. We're going to Mexico. And I'm like, guys, we're about to start shooting. It's okay. It's okay. We're going to go to Mexico. We'll pick it up there. We'll pick it up in Texas. And I remember thinking to myself, this is a bad idea, but I was looking at the salary or the weekly paycheck that I was going to get for the next 12 or 13 weeks, somewhere in the range of $5,000 or $10,000 a week. I don't remember what the rate was, but it was a lot of money. And I was thinking to myself, I want that money. And I let greed get in the way of that decision. We left the United States without work permits, without Mexican pesos. We were literally shuttling money back and forth in piles in people's pockets, going, US dollars, going from the US, bringing it back in, taking it to this dude at a travel agency who was converting it into pesos so that we could actually make the movie. And in retrospect, I was the worst idea in the history of man. And I let greed get in the way of my decisions, and it was my own fault. I should have said, no, you know what, guys, fabulous. Have a good time in Mexico. I'm sure it's going to be great. You'll win an Oscar, and I'll wave at you from the TV. God bless. Bye-bye. I didn't. I got on a plane, and I almost wound up getting arrested.
Wow.
Yeah. What basically happened was the production ran out of money after, the ninth day of principal. They had raised half the money they said they were going to raise. And they basically said, we're going back to America to go raise more money. And there were 53 cast and crew plus $3.5 million worth of gear from the U.S. in Monterrey, Mexico. And they skipped town. And then the Secretary of Labor comes in and says, well, you're the highest ranking producer who's still here. You need to cough up $160,000. This is on Wednesday night. If you don't do it by Saturday, you're going to be arrested. Oh, and by the way, your visa's been revoked as of right now. You can't leave the country. And then within 30 minutes of that meeting, my U.S. cell phone stopped working. I had to go buy a burner from a kiosk down the street from my hotel.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, no joke. I mean, it was like, holy cow. I don't know if that's coincidence. I don't know if it was intentional. Couldn't tell you. But that is what happened. And it was terrifying.
I bet.
It all worked out. I had a really great production manager who was a bunch of years older than me. He's probably 15 or 20 years older than me, a man called Chris Morgan. And he was calm, and we worked through the issues together, got everybody out. I left, he left shortly after me, and everything got worked out. I think what wound up happening was some investors came in, paid out the crew, and all of those problems got solved over time. But, it was a snowball picking up steam, and it just turned into more fraud, one after the other. And it goes into it at the end of the book.
Wow. Yeah, I'm just partway through the book right now. It's already interesting. I always try to order my guest's book and plenty of time for me to read it. And I literally just got it on Saturday. So I just haven't had time to finish it with some other big, huge deadline things I've got to get done. But it's been interesting and fun. It's been my late night reading. So,
well, I'll give you a hack in the book. When you get to the section in the sort of almost toward the end of the book where you're like, I think I read this in the beginning. You did. It's exactly the same. It's just reciting it, putting back in chronological order. There's a little bit added to it, but when you get to that section, just skip the chapter and you'll save some time.
All right, let's talk about one of your your greatest accomplishments, but total opposite of your greatest challenge. So what was something that you just absolutely loved working on?
I have to say my favorite movie I ever worked on was Tuesdays with Morrie, which was a Hank Azaria, Jack Lemmon movie that was built off of Mitch Albom's best-selling book called Tuesdays with Morrie, which was about Morrie Schwartz, who was a man who contracted ALS. In fact, Ted Koppel used to interview him at the time that he was sick. And Mitch Albom who was, I think, an on-air sports personality, I believe in Michigan somewhere. I don't remember exactly.
That's correct.
Where. So it was a fascinating book. And when I remember reading it in Galley, in fact, the head of development, Susan Heyer, had come in to the head of the company, put the galley down on the desk and said, buy this book. She's like, is it good? Why? And she's like, buy it. Don't ask questions. Pick up the phone. Buy it right now. Get off whatever you're doing. Buy this book. And she did. To her credit, Kate Forte bought the book, and it was turned into a screenplay within a couple of years and was made for ABC. And reading that book was, for me, a transformational. I had already lived my life the way Morrie Schwartz advocates in the book, which was live in the moment now. I got out of marketing and advertising because I was constantly living in the year to year and a half from today. And I just didn't like the pace of how we were living in this place of marketing movies or working on marketing movies in June for movies that were going to show up in theaters in December, January, and February. So I was always 6 months to a year ahead of everything. And I just felt like that didn't feel right for me. So I wanted to live more of a purpose-driven and present way of thinking. And I did that in my mid-20s and worked in film production. Everything was about putting out fires in the now and not in the 6 months from now. And then when I read Tuesdays with Morrie, it really struck a chord with me in a way that I hadn't really ever thought about before. But I had kind of been living my life that way just naturally. And then that book just distilled all of those feelings I had in my mid-20s into one place. And, it was being turned into a movie that was with amazing people. Everybody, from the actors to the crew, it was just an experience where you don't often encounter working on a movie like that. And I think a lot of that is a testament to Maury Schwartz and Mitch Albom and the book he wrote.
Wow, that's great. I loved that book too. And and I saw the movie, so it was great.
Well,
you also mentioned in the pre-interview surviving the Jackass movie without being arrested. I found that interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the Jackass movie was amazing. I was, it was one of those things where a buddy of mine was the line producer on the picture, and I really didn't know Jackass. I'd seen a few episodes on MTV when it used to be a network on cable television, and I thought they were funny. And my friend Derek calls me up and says, I think I called him actually, said I was looking for work. And he says, I don't really have a job for a producer, but I need a coordinator on this picture. Will you come do it? And I was like, yeah, why not? I wasn't working and I needed the money, so I took the job. That's another thing. As I say to my students, don't worry about the title and the job you're doing in the early part of your career. Worry about the people you're working with and the people who you're going to learn from, your boss. And Derek was one of those people who I had great respect for, who I actually hired as a production manager when I ran physical production at Harpo. And a couple years later, he was looking for a slot. And I have great respect for Derek, and his decision making and his moral compass for me is just spot on. And it wasn't ever a question about whether or not I was going to go work for him again. So when he asked, I was like, yeah, why not? So I took the job. And what's interesting about Jackass is most actors, when they're working, when they're in front of the camera, they're doing whatever job the screenplay requires. Sometimes that's their own personality, very infrequently, but most of the time it's a part that they create, that they're living in the moment. When that camera turns off, they go back to being whoever they are, right?
Right.
And so on Jackass, that wasn't the case. These guys are on 24/7, and the cameras just happen to be around all the time.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and it's exhausting, I have to tell you. And I was a round peg in a square hole, or probably the square peg in a round hole, to use the analogy correctly. I didn't fit in with their thing. I didn't want to be on camera. I didn't want to participate in the games they played with a lot of their other friends and camera people who showed up in the movie. I was there to do a job. And my job was to get the movie delivered, make sure the paper was filled out, not filled out the wrong way, but produced correctly so that when the studio came time to release the movie, everything was buttoned up, because they kind of played fast and loose with their movies and the stuff they did in the past because there wasn't a lot of money at stake. And when Paramount came in, which actually it was MTV Films, which was owned by Paramount at the time under the Viacom umbrella, in order to deliver to a studio, when you're putting a movie in theatrical, it's a completely different legal standard. It's a different way of having to document what you've done and getting releases from everybody who shows up on screen and every single place that shows up on screen. Just the location agreements alone is a thing that you have to make sure you do correctly. So that's what I was hired to do. And I didn't play ball in terms of go out and party with the guys when it was time to go do that. And it was, probably, 4 or 5 months. It was an amazing experience. I wouldn't trade it for the world. I think the guys who participate in those movies, especially Steve-O, and Ryan Dunn and Wee Man and some of those guys, and Jeff Tremaine, they're all really, really nice guys. They're funny, and as funny as funny gets. They are absolutely hysterical. And that in itself was a lot of fun. And a lot of my friends were like, dude, you're working on Jackass? What are you doing? I'm like, it's hilarious. You should watch it. They're like, yeah. These are educated, erudite people, right? It's not really their thing. But I'm just like, you're missing it, man. It's funny. It's really funny. So anyway, I loved it. And I didn't get arrested. I spent a lot of time in the ER and with the medic, because those guys, a lot of them got hurt. They were really hard stunts, a lot of them. And as the second and third movie apparently got even worse.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Great. So one of the things I asked, and this is more for the performers, but I'm sure you have some insight for it, but how have you navigated between the business and artistic sides of your career?
Well, I think because I came from an artistic background, I was a drummer, although, the joke, what do you call the guy that hangs out with musicians? The drummer. Are they really musicians? Are they really artists? That's sort of the joke. I wasn't really that artistic as far as many people would be, sort of view that particular instrument. But nonetheless, putting that aside, because I came from an artistic background, I'd been around artists my entire life since I was in the 4th grade. And because I came up making music in a recording studio as an engineer and as a tape op, I had been around it. And I learned from a famous producer, a man called Bob Brown, who worked with Alice Cooper and Poison and a bunch of other early, hair bands back in the 80s and in the 70s. He was a rock producer. He was a promoter. And what I learned from Bob was, sometimes you got to let these musicians do their thing. You got to let the creatives spin out of control, go out and do their thing, go out to the edge of the cliff. They might jump off, they may not, but then when they don't, you got to come back, you got to reel them back in. So I learned at a very young age, at an early part of my career, how to manage creatives. And I think as an executive, and especially in finance, sometimes you just got to let the creatives go out there and spin out of control. And going back to, Tuesdays with Morrie, Mick Jackson, who was the director of that movie, his ideas were, 70% were not applicable, 30% were amazing. And you had to let the 70% happen and figure out how to say, yeah, are you really sure you want to do that? Does that really support the movie, or is it some other thing? And knowing how to have that conversation without getting their hackles up and letting them go through that creative process, that in itself is a skill. And as an executive, you have to learn how to let that happen. And I think there is a lack of that with a lot of the executives in Hollywood who work at the networks and the studios. They're really just frustrated filmmakers who don't have the balls to go out and work in a production environment where it's transient work, it's not a regular paycheck, and you're sort of fighting to make a living as an entrepreneur every day. So, those guys and girls sometimes I think lose their way and understand how to manage creatives. And that's where a lot of that friction comes from.
So this is kind of the signature question of our show. What does working from your happy place mean to you?
Working from my happy place. I mean, I think you have to figure out what it is you're good at and what it is you enjoy doing. It's not necessarily going to be your job that fills your soul, the thing you love, right? You may be a frustrated artist. You could be anything. You might be a frustrated, I don't know, gardener. You're not going to, the point I'm making here is you're not necessarily going to do the thing to make a living that you love and that is your passion, right? You can do that as find your 9 to 5 that makes you money, and then find the 5 to 9 that feeds your soul, right? That's a really big axiom I hear in the maker space quite a bit. So if you're going to work from your happy place, find something you enjoy doing that you're good at, and do it consistently so that you get better and better and better at it. And when you're young, there's a few things you have to remember, which are, I think, you need to get to wherever the headquarters is to whatever industry you want to work in. You got to take more risk when you're young. And when I say risk, I don't mean financial. I mean in your career. You need to not care about what you get paid. You have to care about what you learn. And you shouldn't care about what job you're doing. Care about the people you work with and the boss that you're going to learn from. And you should know in Hollywood, the credits you get and the movies you work on, the TV shows you work on, they matter. The reason I got the job at Harpo was because Kate Forte, who was the head of the company, saw my credits working in marketing at the studio, which was Terminator 2, Total Recall, Bugsy, The Doors, big, huge features. Because she saw those, it mattered. It got me that job. I didn't work in production then. I worked in marketing, but just seeing those credits mattered for her. And the relationships you make early on in your career, they matter. And you have to stay connected to your network. And the day you stop networking is the day your career begins to atrophy. It's just that simple. So work from your happy place. Find something you're good at in an industry that you are interested in. It doesn't have to feed your soul, but you got to make a living at it.
I love that. So that really was our great advice for people kind of wanting to break into this. And you went through them fast, so I hope our folks will go back and listen to those again. But don't care about what you get paid, care about what you learn. That I'm just looking at the ones that stand out for me. And especially when you're young in that career, you just have to be willing to learn and be willing to get the more relationships you build. That really comes down to those two things. Like if we were to take this whole list, which I love, 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 but it's like you just really have to be mindful of what you're learning and gaining that, like learning different skill sets each step of the way, and then who you're connected with, because they lead you to your next connection. And I don't know that young people get that today sometimes.
I don't think they do. And I think the idea of work-life balance is BS. When you're 40 and you've got a family, or you're 35 and you've got a kid you're raising, that's work-life balance, right? If you're 40 or 45 and you're working 20 hours a day, you got a problem, man. You got to take a look at yourself. But if you're 20 and you're working 20 or 16 hours a day, that's natural. That's how you're going to get ahead of the person sitting next to you. Work-life balance in your 20s is a myth. Don't buy into it. And use your most valuable resource you have more of when you're 20-something, and that is your time. Use your time to get ahead of the people around you. And the people who get ahead and the people who smoke everyone else around them are the ones who work 16 hours a day and don't care about work-life balance, and they network. You network at breakfast, you network at lunch, you network on the way home. Every day, if you can, 3 times a day, you got to network. Whether it's on the phone, having lunch with your friends around the water cooler, down the hall, at work, whatever it is, that's a networking experience. Going to a movie at night, that's a networking experience. You don't have to make it political and painful and, hey, buddy, will you be my mentor? Just keep it natural, but network and stay connected to those people.
I love that. And you just hit on another really big thing is people get so confused as to what networking is today. It's just really making new connections and staying in touch with the connections that you have. It's really what it boils down to.
Yeah. Introduce yourself to people. When you go to a party, don't stand in the corner with the same 5 people you hang out with all the time. Make a practice of meeting half a dozen people at a party who you don't already know. And you may find that one of those people or 2 of those people are fantastic and someone you want to make a closer friend or get into your business relationship network. So, and it doesn't have to be like, oh, what do you do? Are you a producer? Are you good for me? It doesn't. Just be curious about people and their experience. And if they're not your jam, then move on.
When I was just starting my speaking career, and I mean, just starting out, like literally, like, okay, I've just decided this is what I'm going to do. And as I'm moving around in circles, there were several people that said, oh, like you need to know this one guy. Or do you know him? Oh, you need to meet him. You need to know him. And he was a very seasoned consultant in the industry, had been around forever. And so I thought, okay. And I was kind of naive and it was still scary, but I was like, all right. And I just called him up, left him a message and said, hey, everywhere I turn in circles, people are saying we need to know each other. So I'm just reaching out. This is my name. This is my number. And I hung up and I thought, he's never calling me back. Like that's what I thought in my head. And this is actually a funny story because we were renting a house at the time because we were fixing our house up. So we were in this tiny little cottage. And I wasn't at a regular desk. I was using this dining room table with these old wooden chairs as my desk. And the phone rings and it's him.
Oh, that's amazing.
And he's like, hey, that was an interesting message. I don't get too many of those. And so I thought, what the heck? I'm going to give her a call. And when he did, I was it totally flabbergasted me so much. I was in that wooden chair and I was rocking on the backs of the legs. The whole chair flipped over backwards. And the whole time I'm hanging onto the phone. And I'm like, no way am I telling this guy I just did a complete somersault.
Wow. I'm an ex-sound man. I guarantee you we heard it.
So
that's what I was laughing at, what that would sound like on the other end.
We built the most amazing relationship, and he was very foundational in other people that I met. And that was, I remember that was just a huge risk. And I thought, well, all he can do is never call me back, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, you bring up a really important point, and that is mentor versus sponsor. And I think that's an important distinction because so many, in quotes, gurus say, find a mentor. Your mentor may be someone who has no idea that you're a mentor, that they're a mentor to you. I mentioned Bob Brown in the past. I learned a lot from him. He was a mentor of mine. Did I ever say, hey, buddy, Bob, will you be my mentor? Never. And he never knew it. But I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot from Lisa Michelli, Jim Sermonak, Kate Forte. The list goes on. None of those people did I ever say, hey, man, will you be my mentor? But every one of them were my sponsor. And that is, the distinction is, a sponsor is the person you work for, work with, or who's going to pull you up into the next job in your career. And those are the people you have to find and cling on to like a barnacle, and make sure that you do the job you have now as best as you can and ask for more work, and not stop doing the job you were hired for better than everybody else around you. Because if you can do that, you will move up to the next job. And the sponsor is the person in the organization who's in the room with the executives when they say, hey, we have this open slot. Who should we put in that slot? And that sponsor is the one who's going to say, that should be Tim. You should put him in that chair because here's why. And my experience with them is this. Your mentor will never do that. Your sponsor will.
Wow. That was the biggest gold nugget, truth bomb that anybody has shared in a long time on this show. And because everyone's talking about how do you find a mentor, and you'll have all kinds of mentors, like books you read or people you study, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be that person. Like explaining it the way you did about being a sponsor versus a mentor, that was like, that was the best part for anybody listening. And you are trying to learn and trying to get yourself out there. That was a gold nugget that you need to hang on to with everything you have. So I love that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, this has been delightful. So in closing, any new and exciting things you're working on that you think would be of interest to our listeners? And then where can people find you?
Well, they can find me at timtortora.com. And then there's up the top left, right, there's all kinds of connections to the social. You can pretty much find me everywhere out there. The last name is spelled Tortora. And the thing I'm working on at the moment that's really exciting for me is the idea of content creators, not just bloggers and inexpensive, easy things to do. I mean, like people who make TV and who make movies for a living. I think the future of our business is going to change such that consumers and content creators can be sold to directly from filmmakers. And in doing that, you got to have a few things in your arsenal. You need to have a business to do it in. You got to have a website, a paywall, a payment system, an email system, and a marketing system. Those 6 things are important. And figuring out how to cobble those things together such that you can create demand. Because at the end of the day, we're still in a business where we have to figure out how to make content so that people will open their wallet and pay us. And that doesn't mean YouTube or Facebook, who are billionaires ripping us off, throwing us a few scraps, which I hate the model. And I think it's wrong. And I think it's morally corrupt. But nonetheless, they're capitalists. I have no problem with that. But as a capitalist and as an entrepreneur, you have to figure out how to sell your content directly to consumers. That's our future in the entertainment business. And that excites me a huge amount.
Wow. Gosh, Tim, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for joining us here on Work From Your Happy Place and all of your great insights today. I appreciate it so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
All right. And to all of our listeners out there, thanks so much for joining us today. I hope that you'll listen to this. Some of his greatest pieces of advice he did at rapid speed. So go back, listen to it again. If you are like me, I listen to lots of podcasts while I'm on my treadmill or walking on a trail, and some of them are just worth repeating so you can take notes, jot them down, and really digest the information that you were given. And there were a lot of really great nuggets in here. So I hope you'll take the time to do that. And please rate and review us. And the best form of compliment that you can give us is to share us with a friend. So thank you so much. And we'll see you next time on Work From Your Happy Place.
Thanks for joining us at Work From Your Happy Place. If you like what you hear, please share it with your friends. And be sure to rate and review us on iTunes or Stitcher. For a free gift on finding your own happy place, please visit workfromyourhappyplace.com and click on the free audio button. Thanks again for listening.